The echo of gunshots rang through the valley as Madeline Nash calmly reloaded her Colt Peacemaker, 6 empty bottles lying shattered on the fence post before her. None of the men gathered at a safe distance behind had managed to hit more than 3, and most had missed entirely. She'd hit all 6 in rapid succession, her hands moving with the fluid grace that had made her the talk of Camp Verde, Arizona territory, since she'd arrived 2 years ago in 1881. "That's 6 for 6, gentlemen," she announced, turning to face the small crowd of cowboys and townsfolk who'd gathered for the impromptu shooting contest. "I believe that settles our wager." The men grumbled as they dug into their pockets, producing coins and bills that were reluctantly handed over to the slender woman in men's trousers and a practical blouse, her honey-brown hair tied back in a simple braid. At 24, Madeline had learned that in a place like Camp Verde, reputation was currency, and her skill with a firearm had bought her something most women in the West couldn't claim: respect. "Ain't natural," muttered one of the cowboys, a weathered man named Dooley who worked at the Circle B ranch. "A woman shootin' like that." "Natural enough to take your money," Madeline replied with a tight smile, pocketing her winnings. The small crowd dispersed, some with chuckles, others with wounded pride, all except one man. He stood apart from the others, leaning against a hitching post, his eyes fixed on Madeline with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking out from beneath a well-worn Stetson. Unlike the others, his expression held no resentment, only genuine curiosity. As Madeline secured her pistol in its holster and gathered her things, the stranger approached. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, stopping a respectful distance away. "Miss Nash," he said, tipping his hat. "That was some mighty fine shooting." She studied him, noting the quality of his clothes, worn but well made, and the way he carried his own Colt. "Not flashy, practical. Thank you, Mr. Ryder, Riley Ryder," he said, extending a hand. "Just arrived in Camp Verde yesterday." Madeline hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, calloused from work. "What brings you to our little corner of the territory, Mr. Ryder?" "Cattle business. I'm looking to buy stock for my ranch up north." His eyes flickered to her holster. "But I must say that display of marksmanship was something to behold. I've never seen anyone shoot like that, man or woman." "Flattery doesn't usually come without purpose, Mr. Ryder," she said, gathering the reins of her bay mare. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his deep-set eyes. "You're right about that. I have a proposition for you." Madeline arched an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I want you to teach me." She laughed, a short burst of surprise. "Teach you? To shoot?" "To shoot like you do," he clarified. "I can hit a target well enough, but what you just did, that's artistry." Madeline studied him, searching for mockery but finding none. At about 30, Riley Ryder had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, but there was an intelligence in his eyes that intrigued her. "Why would a man want shooting lessons from a woman?" she asked bluntly. "Because that woman is the best shot I've ever seen," he replied without hesitation. "Where I come from, you learn from the best, regardless of who they are." Madeline considered his request. Teaching a man to shoot better than herself seemed like poor strategy in a world where women had few advantages. Yet there was something in his direct gaze that didn't set off her carefully honed instincts for danger. "I charge $1 an hour," she said finally, "and I don't guarantee results." His smile widened. "Fair enough. When can we start?" "Meet me at the edge of Dripping Springs Wash tomorrow at sunrise," she said, mounting her horse in one fluid motion. "Bring 50 rounds of ammunition and whatever firearms you want to improve with, and Mr. Ryder, Yes, Miss Nash. Don't be late. With that, she nudged her horse forward, leaving Riley Ryder watching as she rode toward her small ranch on the outskirts of town. The morning air was crisp when Madeline arrived at the wash, the first rays of sunlight just beginning to spill over the eastern horizon. The landscape around Camp Verde was a stark beauty, rugged mountains rising in the distance, the Verde River carving its path through the valley, and the endless sky overhead that seemed bigger here than anywhere else she'd ever been. She was surprised to find Riley already there, sitting on a rock, cleaning his revolver. He stood as she approached, and she noted he'd brought not only the ammunition she'd requested but also a rifle case strapped to his saddle. "You're early," she observed, dismounting. "My father always said if you're not early, you're late." He holstered his clean revolver. "And I take my education seriously." Madeline unpacked her own weapons, her trusted Colt, a Winchester rifle, and a small Derringer she kept for emergencies. "Before we begin, I need to understand what you already know. What's your experience with firearms?" "Started shooting when I was 12, Riley said. "Been handling guns for ranch work and protection ever since. Served briefly with the Arizona Rangers before starting my own spread up near Flagstaff." Madeline nodded. A Ranger background meant he already had solid fundamentals. "Show me what you can do. Those bottles over there." She pointed to a collection she'd set up on a fallen log 20 yards away. Riley drew his revolver smoothly, took his stance, and fired. 5 shots, 4 hits. Not bad, but not exceptional either. "Your grip is too tight," Madeline said immediately. "And you're anticipating the recoil. It's making you jerk down slightly before the hammer falls." He holstered his weapon, looking thoughtful rather than defensive. "How do you stay so steady?" "Breathe," she said simply. "Most men treat shooting like a battle. It's not. It's a conversation between you, the gun, and the target." She stepped forward, drawing her own weapon in one fluid motion. 6 shots rang out in rapid succession, and 6 bottles shattered. "You need to listen as much as you speak." Riley watched her with undisguised admiration. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Madeline stiffened slightly. "That's not part of the lesson." He raised his hands in apology. "You're right. I'm here to learn shooting, not pry into personal matters." His easy acceptance softened her stance. "My father was a sharpshooter in the war," she offered. "He believed his daughter should be able to defend herself in a world that wasn't always kind to women alone." Riley nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He taught you well." "He did." Madeline moved closer to him. "Now, let me see your stance again. And this time I want you to think of the gun as an extension of your arm, not a tool you're forcing to behave." They spent the next 2 hours working on fundamentals: grip, stance, breathing, sight alignment. Riley was a quick study, absorbing her instructions without argument or defensiveness. By mid-morning, his accuracy had improved noticeably. "That's enough for today," Madeline said finally. "Practice what I've shown you. Same time tomorrow," Riley nodded, reaching into his pocket for payment. "Worth every penny," he said, handing her $2 silver. "Though I'm curious, why does a woman in Camp Verde need to be the best shot in town?" Madeline took the money, her expression carefully neutral. "Same reason anyone does, Mr. Ryder. Survival." As she rode back toward town, Madeline found herself thinking about Riley Ryder more than she'd intended. There was something refreshing about a man who could take instruction from a woman without his pride getting in the way. Most men in these parts would rather eat dirt than admit a woman could teach them anything worthwhile. The next morning, Riley arrived with coffee in a thermos and a small package of fresh biscuits from the town bakery. "Thought you might appreciate breakfast," he said, offering her a tin cup of the steaming liquid. Shooting on an empty stomach never did anyone any good. Madeline accepted the coffee with surprise. "Thank you, that's thoughtful." They ate in companionable silence as the sun rose fully over the landscape, casting long shadows across the wash. The biscuits were still warm, buttery, and light. "These are from Mrs. Patterson's bakery," Madeline noted. "She doesn't usually open until 7. Riley smiled sheepishly. "I may have knocked on her back door at dawn and paid extra. You went to that trouble for shooting lessons." "I went to that trouble because it seemed like the right thing to do," he replied simply. "You're giving me your time and expertise. Least I could do is make sure you're not hungry while doing it." Something warm unfurled in Madeline's chest, but she tamped it down quickly. She'd learned long ago that kindness from men often came with expectations. "Let's get to work," she said briskly, finishing her coffee. "Today we're moving to moving targets." She set up a series of tin cans suspended from tree branches with varying lengths of twine. A slight breeze made them sway unpredictably. "The trick with moving targets is to shoot where they're going to be, not where they are," Madeline explained. "Your brain needs to calculate distance, speed, and trajectory all at once." Riley watched as she demonstrated, hitting each swinging can with remarkable precision. When his turn came, he missed more than he hit, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "Patience, Mr. Ryder," Madeline said, stepping closer. "May I?" She gestured toward his stance. He nodded, and she positioned herself beside him, adjusting his elbow slightly. "You're rushing the shot. Follow the target with your eyes first, then your gun. Feel its rhythm." Riley was acutely aware of her proximity, the scent of lavender soap mingling with leather and gunpowder. He followed her instruction, tracking a swinging can with his eyes before raising his gun. The shot rang out and the can flew backward with a satisfying ping. "There," Madeline said with approval. "Now do it again." By the end of the second lesson, Riley had improved dramatically. As they packed up their gear, he turned to her with a question that had been on his mind since yesterday. "Miss Nash, would you consider joining me for supper at the hotel tonight? To discuss our next lesson," he added quickly. Madeline hesitated. Dining with a man in public would set tongues wagging in a town the size of Camp Verde. Then again, her reputation was already unusual enough that one dinner could hardly make things worse. "I suppose that would be acceptable," she said finally. 7 o'clock, Riley smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I'll be there at 7 sharp." The Grand Hotel was Camp Verde's attempt at sophistication, with its white tablecloths and actual glassware instead of tin cups. Madeline arrived wearing one of her few dresses, a simple blue calico that she kept for church and town meetings. She'd left her gun belt at home but had her derringer tucked into a hidden pocket. Riley was waiting in the lobby, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and vest. His eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her, but he kept his comments respectful. "Miss Nash, you look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Ryder," she replied, taking it hesitantly. "Though I must warn you, half the town will be talking about us before dessert is served," he smiled wryly. "Let them talk. I'm just having dinner with my shooting instructor." The dining room was half full, and Madeline was aware of the curious glances cast their way, as a waiter led them to a table by the window. Riley pulled out her chair with practiced ease before taking his own seat. "I hope you don't mind my forwardness in asking you to dinner," he said as they settled in. "I've found conversation flows better over food than gunfire." Madeline found herself smiling despite her reservation. A sound observation. "Though I must admit, I'm curious about what aspect of shooting you wish to discuss that couldn't be covered during our lessons." "Perhaps I'm more interested in the shooter than the shooting," Riley admitted. Madeline raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Ryder, Riley, please," he interrupted gently. "Riley," she conceded, "if your interest is personal rather than professional, I should be clear that I'm not in the market for romantic entanglements." He nodded, accepting her boundary without protest. Duly noted, but friendship isn't a romantic entanglement, is it? And I find myself in a new town with few acquaintances and one remarkably talented shooting instructor who I'd like to know better. As a friend, he clarified. Madeline studied him, trying to detect any underlying motives in his open expression. Finding none, she relaxed slightly. "Friendship I can consider, though I warn you, I'm not particularly skilled at it." "I find that hard to believe." "Believe it," she said, unfolding her napkin. "Most women in town avoid me because I wear trousers and carry a gun. Most men resent me because I shoot better than they do. It doesn't leave much room for social niceties." "Then perhaps we're well matched," Riley said. "I've spent most of my life on horseback moving cattle. Social graces weren't high on the list of required skills." Their conversation flowed surprisingly easily through dinner. Riley told her about his ranch north of Flagstaff, a modest spread he'd built up over the past 5 years after leaving the Rangers. Madeline shared stories about Camp Verde and its colorful inhabitants, carefully avoiding personal details about her own past. As they finished their apple pie, Riley leaned forward slightly. "You know, you still haven't told me why being the best shot in town matters so much to you." Madeline's fingers tightened on her fork. "Some questions are better left for when we know each other better, Mr. Ryder." "Fair enough," he said easily, "though I hope someday you'll trust me enough to share that story." After dinner, he walked her to her horse, maintaining a respectful distance. "Same time tomorrow for our lesson?" he asked. "Yes," she agreed, "and this time bring your rifle. Your revolver work is coming along nicely." As she rode home under the star-filled Arizona sky, Madeline found herself unsettled by how comfortable she'd felt in Riley's company. Trust wasn't something she gave easily, and yet she'd spent an entire evening with a man she'd known for only 2 days, enjoying herself more than she had in years. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous and foolish. Yet the next morning, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance before heading to their meeting place. Their third lesson focused on rifle work. Riley's marksmanship with a Winchester was better than with his revolver, but still not at the level Madeline could achieve. "It's all about becoming one with the rifle," she explained, demonstrating a prone shooting position. "Feel how your heartbeat affects the barrel. Learn to time your shots between beats." Riley followed her example, stretching out on the ground beside her. The Winchester felt like an old friend in his hands, but Madeline's techniques were showing him nuances he'd never considered. "That's it," she encouraged as he hit a distant target. "Now try it standing." They worked through various positions, standing, kneeling, seated. By mid-morning, they were both dusty and sweating in the Arizona heat. "There's a swimming hole about a 1/4 mile up the wash," Madeline said, wiping her brow. "Might be a good place to cool off before we continue." Riley looked surprised at the suggestion but nodded agreement. They walked in comfortable silence, leading their horses through the rocky terrain, until they reached a bend in the wash where water had pooled deep and clear, fed by a small spring. "I'll turn my back while you cool off first," Riley offered, demonstrating his gentlemanly intentions by walking a few paces away and facing the opposite direction. Madeline hesitated, then removed her boots and rolled up her trouser legs. She waded into the cool water up to her knees, sighing with relief as the heat of the day washed away. "Your turn," she called after a few minutes, stepping out and sitting on a boulder to dry her feet. Riley removed his boots and shirt before wading in, dunking his head completely under the water before emerging with a refreshed expression. Madeline found herself watching the play of muscles across his shoulders and back, the way the water dripped from his dark hair down his tanned skin. She looked away quickly when he turned, pretending great interest in putting her boots back on. "That's much better," Riley said, shrugging his shirt back on without fully drying off. "Heat like this makes me question my decision to settle in Arizona territory sometimes." "Where would you go instead?" Madeline asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question as he pulled on his boots. "Oregon, maybe. I hear it's green year-round with enough rain to make a man forget what dust looks like." "Sounds damp," she said with a small smile. "It does," he agreed. "But there's something appealing about the idea of lush land that doesn't try to kill you with drought or heat half the year." They made their way back to their shooting spot, and Madeline found herself sharing more than she intended. "I've never been further north than Denver," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what the rest of the country looks like." "Maybe you'll see it someday," Riley said. "Maybe." But her tone suggested she didn't believe it. The lesson continued until noon, when the heat became too intense for comfort. As they packed up, Riley asked, "Would it be presumptuous to request another dinner tonight?" Madeline secured her rifle in its scabbard. "It would," she confirmed, "but I accept nonetheless." His smile was worth the gossip she knew would intensify after a second public dinner. For the first time in years, Madeline found herself caring less about what others thought and more about the simple pleasure of good company. That evening, they dined again at the hotel, and Madeline noticed several townsfolk watching them with undisguised interest. Sheriff Davis even tipped his hat as he passed their table, a knowing gleam in his eye. "We're causing quite a stir," Riley noted, following her gaze. "Camp Verde doesn't have much entertainment beyond the occasional traveling show," Madeline replied dryly. "A woman who outshots men having dinner with a handsome stranger is practically theatrical." Riley's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You think I'm handsome?" Madeline felt warmth creep into her cheeks. "I think you know very well what you look like, Mr. Ryder." He laughed, a deep, pleasant sound that turned more heads their way. "I'm teasing, Miss Nash, though I'm flattered nonetheless." Their conversation moved to safer topics: the cattle business, the changing landscape of the West as more settlers arrived, the challenges of ranch life. Riley spoke of his home with obvious pride, describing the small but sturdy house he'd built himself and the growing herd of cattle that represented years of hard work. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "How did you come to own a ranch here?" Madeline tensed slightly but decided a partial truth was safe enough. "I inherited it. My uncle left it to me when he passed 2 years ago. It wasn't much, just a small house and some land, but it was mine free and clear." "And that's when you came to Camp Verde," she nodded. "I'd been traveling, looking for somewhere to settle. The ranch gave me that opportunity." Riley seemed to sense there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Do you plan to stay here permanently?" "I don't make long-term plans," Madeline said carefully. "Experience has taught me that life rarely cooperates with them." "A fair assessment," Riley agreed. "Though sometimes it's the unexpected turns that lead us where we need to be." As they finished their meal, Riley said, "I have a confession to make." Madeline stiffened, her hand instinctively moving toward where her derringer would be if she were wearing trousers. "What kind of confession?" "I came to Camp Verde for cattle, it's true," he said. "But I'd heard stories about a woman who could outshoot any man before I arrived." "They've reached as far as Prescott. You're something of a legend, Miss Nash." "Legends are often exaggerated," she said cautiously. "Not this one." His gaze was direct, admiring but not presumptuous. "I wanted to see if the stories were true. They didn't do you justice." Madeline was unsure how to respond to such straightforward praise. "Is that why you asked me to teach you?" "Curiosity about the legend," Partly, he admitted. But mostly because I recognize excellence when I see it, and I've always believed in learning from the best. His honesty was disarming. Well, at least you're truthful about your motives, she said finally. I try to be, Riley said. Deception has a way of complicating life unnecessarily. After dinner, he walked her to her horse again. This time, before she mounted, he said, "There's a social at the church this Saturday evening. Would you consider attending with me?" Madeline blinked in surprise. Dinner was one thing, but a social was quite another. It implied a courtship interest that would set every tongue in town wagging. "Mr. Ryder, Riley, I'm not sure that would be wise. Because of what people might think?" he asked. "Because I don't attend socials," she replied firmly. "I'm not comfortable in such settings." Riley studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes. Then perhaps a different suggestion. "I plan to ride out to see the Montezuma Castle ruins on Sunday. They say it's quite a sight. Would you consider joining me? Just a day ride, nothing more." The ancient cliff dwellings were about 15 miles north of Camp Verde, a respected historical site that drew occasional visitors. A daylight excursion, there would be less gossip worthy than a social dance. "I could consider that," Madeline said finally. "As friends." "As friends," he agreed readily. "Though I warn you, I've packed enough questions about shooting techniques to last the entire journey." She found herself smiling. "I would expect nothing less." The next 2 days followed a similar pattern: morning shooting lessons, during which Riley continued to improve under Madeline's tutelage, followed by shared meals and increasingly comfortable conversation. By their 5th lesson, Riley was hitting targets with a precision that approached Madeline's own, though she still maintained her edge. "You're a remarkably fast learner," she commented as he fired his Winchester, hitting 5 distant targets in rapid succession. "I have an excellent teacher," he replied, lowering the rifle. "Though I'm beginning to suspect your real secret isn't technique but natural talent." Madeline reloaded her own weapon. "Talent means nothing without practice and discipline. My father used to have me dry fire for an hour each day before I was allowed to use actual ammunition. Bullets cost money, he'd say, but good habits are priceless." "Wise man," Riley observed. "You speak of him in the past tense. May I ask what happened?" Madeline's hand stilled on her rifle. After a moment's hesitation, she said, "He was killed 6 years ago. Rustlers hit our small ranch in Colorado. He fought back." "I'm sorry," Riley said quietly. "Were you there when it happened?" She nodded once, her face tight with old pain. "I was 19. They didn't expect the rancher's daughter to be armed. That was their mistake." Understanding dawned in Riley's eyes. "You shot them. 2 of them. The 3rd escaped." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "They'd already killed my father by then." Riley was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. "So that's why you became the best shot around." "One of the reasons," she acknowledged. "After that, I spent 3 years tracking the 3rd man, eventually found him in a saloon in Santa Fe. He didn't recognize me until it was too late." Riley didn't look shocked or judgmental, merely thoughtful. "Justice is hard to come by out here. Sometimes we have to administer it ourselves." "The law didn't see it that way," Madeline said grimly. "The territorial marshal had questions." "Many questions. I left before he could find answers that would satisfy him. And you've been moving since then." "Until I came here," she confirmed. "My mother's brother left me this property, a fresh start away from Colorado." She looked at him directly. "Now you understand why I don't make long-term plans, Mr. Ryder." He met her gaze steadily. "I understand that you've survived tremendous loss and done what you needed to protect yourself. That's not something to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed," Madeline replied. "I'm careful." The marshal had a long memory and friends in law enforcement throughout the territories. "You think he's still looking for you?" she shrugged. "It's been 3 years and I've changed my appearance since then, but caution has kept me alive this long." Riley nodded, then deliberately changed the subject, sensing she'd shared as much as she was comfortable with. "Show me again how you maintain accuracy when firing rapidly. I still can't match your speed." Madeline demonstrated, grateful for his understanding and discretion. As they continued the lesson, she found herself watching him differently, aware that she'd shared more of her past with him than with anyone since arriving in Camp Verde. It was terrifying, and somehow liberating. Sunday dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for their planned excursion to Montezuma Castle. Madeline dressed in her usual practical attire: trousers, boots, and a light shirt, with a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. She packed food and water, her weapons, and a small sketchbook she occasionally used to record interesting sights. Riley met her at her ranch, arriving promptly at 8 o'clock with his own provisions and a smile that seemed to brighten the already sunny morning. "Ready for our adventure, Miss Nash?" he asked, dismounting to help her secure her supplies. "Madeline," she said impulsively. "If we're to be friends on an outing, you should call me Madeline." His smile widened. "Madeline it is, and a beautiful name it is too." They rode north, following the Verde River for part of the journey before turning east toward the limestone cliffs, where the ancient dwelling had been built. Riley proved to be an engaging traveling companion, pointing out interesting plants and wildlife, sharing stories of his ranger days, and asking thoughtful questions about the shooting techniques they'd been practicing. "Have you ever considered competitive shooting?" he asked as they paused to water their horses. "There are tournaments in some of the larger cities. With your skill, you could win substantial prizes." Madeline shook her head. "Drawing that kind of attention would be unwise given my history." Riley nodded in understanding. "Of course. Though it seems a shame the world can't witness your talent." "The world has survived this long without it," she replied wryly. "I suspect it will continue to do so." They reached Montezuma Castle by midday, tethering their horses in the shade before approaching the impressive cliff dwelling. Built high into a recess in the white limestone cliff, the ancient structure looked like it had grown organically from the rock face itself, its multiple stories testimony to the ingenuity of its long-gone builders. "It's remarkable," Madeline said, gazing up at the dwelling. "To think it's been here for centuries. The Sinagua people built it around 1100, according to what I've read," Riley said. "Abandoned it long before European settlers arrived. No one knows exactly why." They found a shady spot with a good view of the castle and spread out the blanket Riley had brought for their picnic lunch. As they ate the simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, Madeline found herself sketching the outline of the cliff dwelling in her small book. "You draw?" Riley asked, noticing her activity. "Not well," she admitted, "but I like to remember the places I've been. Words don't always capture the feeling of a place the way a sketch can, however amateur." Riley leaned over to look at her drawing. "You're too modest. That's quite good." Their shoulders were nearly touching, and Madeline was acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of his soap mingling with the leather and sun-warmed skin. She hadn't been this close to a man in years, not one who wasn't trying to shoot her, at least. "Thank you," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just a hobby." "We all need something beyond work and survival," Riley said, settling back to give her space. "What else do you enjoy besides shooting and drawing?" Madeline considered the question. "Reading when I can get books. And I've been experimenting with gardening since settling at the ranch. Not much success yet, but I'm learning." "What do you grow?" "Vegetables mostly. Some herbs. I'm trying to cultivate a small apple tree, but the climate here is challenging for fruit." Riley smiled. "My mother had a way with plants. She could make anything grow, even in the worst soil. She always said plants respond to love as much as water." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he said softly. "Passed 5 years ago, influenza." Madeline's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry." "My mother died when I was 12. Childbirth. The baby didn't survive either." Riley nodded in understanding. "So we're both orphans of a sort." "Of a sort," she agreed. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as shadows shifted across the ancient dwelling. Eventually, Riley said, "May I ask you something personal, Madeline?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "Are you happy here? In Camp Verde, I mean." The question surprised her. "Happy," she repeated as if testing an unfamiliar word. "I'm secure here. I have my ranch, my independence. The townsfolk have come to accept my peculiarities, more or less." "That's not the same as happiness," Riley observed gently. Madeline looked out over the landscape, considering his point. "Perhaps not. But I've learned not to expect too much from life. Security is nothing to sneeze at." "No, it isn't," he agreed. "But neither is joy, companionship, purpose beyond mere survival." She turned to look at him directly. "And have you found those things, Riley Ryder? Joy, purpose?" "I'm working on it," he said with a small smile. "My ranch gives me purpose. As for joy and companionship," his eyes held hers, "I find I'm enjoying your company tremendously, more than I've enjoyed anyone's in a very long time." Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Ryder, Riley," he corrected gently. "Riley," she conceded. "I thought we agreed this was friendship, not courtship." "We did," he acknowledged. "But can't friends enjoy each other's company? Can't they find joy in shared experiences, in conversation that stimulates the mind and soothes the soul?" Put that way, it seemed a reasonable position. "I suppose they can," she allowed. "Good," he said, reaching into his saddlebag, "because I brought something I thought you might enjoy." He produced a book, well worn but carefully preserved. "Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Have you read it?" Madeline's eyes widened. "No, I haven't." "Poetry isn't easy to come by in Camp Verde." "Then allow me," he said, opening to a marked page. His voice, normally conversational, took on a deeper resonance as he read. "This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals, despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy, devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants, argue not concerning God, have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown or to any man or number of men." He continued reading, the words painting visions of a life lived fully, without constraint, embracing the world in all its complexity. Madeline found herself mesmerized, not just by the poetry, but by the obvious emotion in Riley's voice as he read. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's beautiful," she said finally, "and challenging." "Whitman usually is," Riley replied with a smile. "He reminds us that life is meant to be more than mere existence. It's meant to be experienced, embraced with all its joys and sorrows." "A luxury not everyone can afford," Madeline pointed out. "Perhaps," Riley acknowledged. "Or perhaps it's not a luxury at all, but a necessity we deny ourselves out of fear." His words struck uncomfortably close to home. "You're quite the philosopher for a cattle rancher," she said, deflecting. "Life on horseback gives a man plenty of time to think," he replied easily. "Would you like to hear another?" They spent the afternoon sharing the book, taking turns reading passages that spoke to them. As the sun began its westward descent, they reluctantly packed up their belongings for the ride back to Camp Verde. "Thank you for accompanying me today," Riley said as they mounted their horses. I've enjoyed your company immensely. As have I, Madeline admitted. It's been refreshing to spend time away from town. We should do it again, he suggested. Perhaps next Sunday, she hesitated, aware that establishing such a pattern would only fuel the town's gossip, and yet the prospect of another day like this one was undeniably appealing. Perhaps, she said noncommittally. Though I imagine you'll need to return to your ranch soon, your cattle business must be nearly concluded. Riley's expression grew serious. Actually, I've been meaning to discuss that with you. The cattle purchase is complete, but I find myself reluctant to leave Camp Verde just yet. Oh, Madeline kept her tone carefully neutral. I've arranged for the cattle to be driven north without me. I thought I might stay another week or two. If my shooting instructor is amenable to continuing our lessons, that is. Madeline knew she should discourage him. Extended shooting lessons would only deepen whatever was growing between them, this friendship that increasingly felt like something more. The sensible thing would be to wish him well on his journey home. Instead, she heard herself say, I believe that could be arranged, though I'm not sure how much more I can teach you. Riley's smile was warm enough to chase away the gathering evening chill. I'm certain you have many more secrets to share, Madeline Nash, and I'm a very dedicated student. As they rode back toward Camp Verde, Madeline found herself wondering just what she was getting herself into, and why the prospect filled her with both trepidation and an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm to their days that Madeline found increasingly comfortable. Mornings were devoted to shooting lessons, which had evolved into friendly competitions as Riley's skill approached her own. Afternoons often found them riding the countryside around Camp Verde, exploring hidden canyons and scenic vistas. Evenings usually meant dinner at the hotel or occasionally at Madeline's small ranch house, where Riley proved to be a surprisingly competent cook. My father believed men who couldn't feed themselves deserved to go hungry, he explained one evening as he prepared a rabbit stew over her cook stove. So he made sure all his sons knew their way around a kitchen. How many brothers do you have? Madeline asked, setting plates on her small table. 2, both older. One's a lawyer in Denver, the other runs a mercantile in Tucson. Riley stirred the pot, adding a pinch of dried herbs. I was always the odd one out, more interested in open spaces than buildings and books. Yet you quote Whitman and discuss philosophy, Madeline observed. You're hardly uncultured. He smiled at that. My mother's influence. She believed education happened everywhere, not just in schoolrooms. She read to us every night, even when we were nearly grown men who thought ourselves too old for such things. The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables and seasoned perfectly. As they ate, Madeline found herself sharing stories of her own childhood happier times before her mother's death, when her family's small ranch in Colorado had seemed like the whole world. My father taught me to shoot when I was 8, she recalled. Mother was horrified, but he insisted. The world doesn't care if you're female when it comes calling with trouble, he told me. Wise man, Riley said. Though I'm guessing he never anticipated just how proficient his daughter would become. No, Madeline agreed with a small smile. I think even he would be surprised. After dinner, they sat on her small porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The night was cool but not cold, perfect for stargazing. I've been thinking, Riley said after a comfortable silence. The cattle drive should reach my ranch by the end of next week. I should be there to receive them. Madeline felt a pang of disappointment but kept her expression neutral. Of course, you have responsibilities. I do, he agreed, but I find myself reluctant to leave Camp Verde, or more specifically, to leave you. Her heart quickened at his direct statement. "Riley, please let me finish," he said gently. "These past weeks have been the happiest I can remember in years. Your company, your conversation, your everything. You've become important to me, Madeline." She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to echo his sentiment, to admit that his presence had brought a light to her life she hadn't realized was missing. Another part, the cautious, survival-focused part, warned against such vulnerability. "I care for you too," she said finally, choosing her words with care. "But my situation is complicated. My past is your past," Riley finished for her. "We all have things we wish were different, choices we might make differently with hindsight, but we can't live looking backward." "It's not that simple," Madeline insisted. "The marshal who investigated the shooting in Santa Fe, he was thorough, connected. If he ever tracked me here—" Riley turned to face her directly. "Did he have evidence against you? Witnesses?" She shook her head. "No, just suspicion. The man I confronted was known to be one of the rustlers who attacked our ranch, and I made no secret of my search for justice." "Then legally, you have nothing to fear," Riley pointed out. "Suspicion isn't proof, especially after so many years." "Perhaps," Madeline acknowledged. "But living with the possibility of that past catching up to me, it makes planning a future difficult." Riley reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "May I offer a different perspective?" She nodded, acutely aware of the warmth of his touch. "The future is uncertain for all of us, Madeline. A cattle stampede, a fall from a horse, illness, any number of things could end our days without warning. The question isn't whether we'll have tomorrow, but how we spend today." His words resonated with a truth she couldn't deny. How many days had she spent merely existing, focused on security rather than living? "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. "Come with me," he said simply. "To my ranch near Flagstaff. It's remote, peaceful. A fresh start if you want it, or just a visit if you're not ready for more." Madeline stared at him, stunned by the offer. "You want me to leave Camp Verde? Leave my ranch?" "Only if you want to," he clarified. "I'm not asking you to abandon your home. I'm asking you to consider that happiness might be worth pursuing, even with uncertainty." "And if I'm not ready for such a step?" Riley squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll return to Flagstaff alone, but with your permission to write to you, to visit when I can, to see where time and patience might lead us." His offer was generous, respectful of her autonomy. Still, the prospect of change, of opening herself to possibilities beyond mere survival, was terrifying. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Riley agreed immediately. "I don't leave for another week. Take all the time you need." The days that followed were filled with internal debate as Madeline weighed her options. Her ranch in Camp Verde represented security, independence, everything she'd worked toward since fleeing Colorado. Yet Riley's words about the difference between security and happiness echoed in her mind. 4 days before Riley's planned departure, Madeline was in town purchasing supplies when she noticed an unfamiliar man speaking with Sheriff Davis. Something about his bearing, the way he stood, the careful observation in his eyes as he surveyed the street, sent a chill down her spine. She slipped into the mercantile, positioning herself near the window where she could observe without being obvious. The stranger was showing the sheriff a paper, a wanted poster, or perhaps a photograph. Davis shook his head, apparently denying knowledge of whatever the man sought. When the stranger turned slightly, Madeline caught sight of a badge partially concealed by his coat, a U.S. Marshal's badge. Her heart pounded as she quickly gathered her purchases and paid, keeping her head down. She left through the back entrance of the store, circling around to reach her horse without returning to the main street. As she rode home, her mind raced. It could be coincidence marshals pass through territories all the time on official business. But the timing, so close to her conversations with Riley about her past, felt ominous. She spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened vigilance, checking and rechecking her weapons, considering what she would need if quick departure became necessary. By evening, her nerves were frayed thin. A knock at her door sent her reaching for her revolver before Riley's voice called out, "Madeline, it's me." She opened the door, relief washing over her at the sight of his familiar face. "Come in quickly," she said, glancing past him into the gathering darkness. Riley entered, his expression shifting to concern as he noticed the gun in her hand and the tension in her posture. "What's happened?" "There's a marshal in town," Madeline said, securing the door behind him. "I saw him talking to Sheriff Davis this afternoon. Did he see you?" Riley asked immediately. "I don't think so. I kept my distance." She paced across the small room. "It could be nothing, just a coincidence." Riley watched her movement, his brow furrowed. "But you don't believe in coincidences?" "Not generally, no." Madeline stopped pacing, facing him directly. "I think I need to leave Camp Verde. Soon." Instead of arguing or questioning, Riley simply nodded. "What do you need?" His immediate support without judgment or doubt nearly undid her composure. I don't know yet. I need to think clearly, plan." "Let me help," he said, moving closer. Two heads are better than one, especially when one of them isn't clouded by fear. She wanted to protest that she wasn't afraid, merely cautious, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the lie. "All right," she conceded. "Help me think this through." They spent the next hour discussing options. Running immediately risked drawing attention. Staying put risked discovery if the marshal was indeed looking for her. Every choice carried risk. "There's another possibility," Riley said finally. "One we haven't discussed." "What's that?" "We confront the situation directly." He held up a hand as she began to protest. "Not by turning yourself in, but by determining exactly what the marshal wants. Knowledge is power, Madeline. Right now, we're operating on assumption. You want to find out why he's here. How do you propose we do that?" "I can speak with Sheriff Davis," Riley suggested. "We've developed a cordial relationship over these weeks. I can inquire about the marshal's business without raising suspicion." Madeline considered the idea. It was risky, but perhaps less so than fleeing blindly or remaining in ignorance. "All right," she said finally. "But be careful, Davis isn't a fool." "I'll be discreet," Riley promised. "First thing tomorrow." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Will you be all right here alone tonight?" The question carried implications that made Madeline's heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I've faced worse than uncertainty." Riley nodded, though reluctance was clear in his expression. "Lock the door behind me. I'll return as soon as I learn anything." After he left, Madeline secured the door and windows, then sat cleaning her weapons, a familiar ritual that usually calmed her nerves. Tonight, however, her thoughts remained turbulent, filled with images of prison cells and hangman's nooses. And increasingly, of a future she might never see, one that included Riley Ryder. The next morning, Madeline was tending to chores around her small ranch when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She reached for her revolver, positioning herself behind the corner of the barn with a clear line of sight to the approaching rider. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Riley, riding fast. She stepped into view, holstering her weapon as he dismounted in a fluid motion. "What did you learn?" she asked without preamble. Riley's expression was serious but not grim. "The marshal is indeed looking for someone, but not you." "What?" Madeline felt light-headed with surprise. "Are you certain?" "Positive. He's tracking a bank robber last seen near Prescott. Davis mentioned he's been following the man for months. working his way south through the territory. Madeline sagged against the barn wall, the tension of the past 24 hours draining away so suddenly she felt weak. "It's not about me," she murmured. "It's not about Santa Fe." "No," Riley confirmed, stepping closer to steady her. "You're safe, Madeline." She looked up at him, a strange mixture of emotions washing through her: relief, disbelief, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I was so sure," she whispered, "so ready to run again." "You don't have to run anymore," Riley said softly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Not unless you want to." The double meaning in his words wasn't lost on her. Run from the law or run toward something new, toward him. "I've been thinking about your offer," Madeline said, finding courage in the wake of relief. "About visiting your ranch." Hope flickered in Riley's eyes, but he kept his tone measured. "And, I would like to see it," she said carefully. "Not permanently, not yet, but perhaps." Perhaps a visit would be a good start. Riley's smile bloomed slowly, transforming his face. "A start is all I'm asking for." Impulsively, Madeline reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You've been patient with me, more patient than I probably deserve." "Some things are worth waiting for," he replied, his voice deepening. "Some people too." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then, with deliberate slowness, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Riley leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Madeline responded, stepping closer into his embrace, the kiss deepened, becoming something neither of them had expected to find in Camp Verde: a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Madeline found herself smiling, a real, uninhibited expression that felt foreign to her face after so many years of careful control. "When do we leave for Flagstaff?" she asked. "I plan to start back the day after tomorrow," Riley said, his arms still around her waist. "But we can adjust that timeline if you need more time to prepare." Madeline considered the small ranch that had been her haven for 2 years. It represented security, yes, but also isolation. A life half-lived. "The day after tomorrow is perfect," she decided. "I don't need much time to pack what matters." Over the next 2 days, Madeline made arrangements for her absence. She spoke with her nearest neighbor, an elderly rancher named Simmons, who agreed to check on her property periodically. She packed clothing, her weapons, her sketchbook, and the few mementos she possessed of her parents. The ranch itself, she would keep a safety net, perhaps, or simply a connection to the life she'd built for herself after so much uncertainty. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool, the first hints of autumn touching the air. Riley arrived early, helping load her things onto a pack horse he'd brought specifically for that purpose. "Ready?" he asked as they mounted their horses. Madeline looked back at the small house one last time. "Yes," she said with surprising certainty. "I'm ready." The journey to Flagstaff would take several days, following the natural corridor carved by the Verde River before heading northwest into higher country. They rode at a comfortable pace, stopping frequently to rest the horses and enjoy the changing landscape. As they climbed in elevation, pine forests replaced the desert scrub, the air grew cooler, and Madeline found herself enchanted by terrain so different from what she'd become accustomed to in Camp Verde. "It's beautiful," she commented as they made camp on the second night, surrounded by towering ponderosa pines. "Wait until you see it in winter," Riley said, building their campfire. "The snow transforms everything, like being in a different world entirely." "I've never seen heavy snow," Madeline admitted. "Colorado had winter, of course, but nothing like what you describe." Riley looked up from the fire, surprise evident in his expression. "Then you have a treat in store. The first snow usually falls in November, Perhaps you'll still be visiting then." The casual mention of her potentially extended stay made Madeline thoughtful. What had begun as an impulsive decision to visit was evolving into something more substantial with each passing mile. Their days on the trail established a comfortable rhythm. Riley proved to be as skilled in wilderness travel as he was with cattle and shooting. Each evening, he read aloud from his copy of Whitman as they sat beside the campfire, the words taking on new resonance under the star-filled sky. On the fourth day, as they crested a ridge, Riley pointed ahead. "There it is, Flagstaff. My ranch is about 5 miles north of town." Madeline took in the sight of the small but bustling settlement nestled among the pines, with the impressive bulk of what Riley had told her was the San Francisco peaks rising majestically in the background. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "It's grander somehow." "The mountains make everything seem more significant," Riley agreed. "They have a way of putting human concerns in perspective." They bypassed the town itself, continuing north along well-established trails until they reached a valley cradled between forested hills. A creek meandered through the center, and nestled beside it was a substantial log cabin with a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held a handful of horses that nickered in greeting as they approached. "Welcome to Ryder Ranch," Riley said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "It's not grand, but it's home." "It's wonderful," Madeline said sincerely, taking in the picturesque setting. The cabin was larger than she'd imagined, well-built and meticulously maintained. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, indicating someone was in residence. As they approached, the cabin door opened, and an older man with weathered features and gray, streaked hair stepped onto the porch. "About time you showed up," he called good-naturedly. "Was beginning to think you'd decided to settle in Camp Verde permanently." "Got delayed by compelling company," Riley replied with a smile, dismounting. He helped Madeline down from her horse before turning to the man. "Madeline Nash, this is Hank Wilson, my foreman and the closest thing to family I have out here. Hank, Miss Madeline Nash of Camp Verde." Hank's eyebrows rose slightly as he took in Madeline's practical riding attire and the revolver at her hip, but his smile was genuine as he touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, it's a pleasure." Riley mentioned in his letter that he might be bringing a guest, though he was remarkably short on details. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Wilson," Madeline replied, somewhat relieved by the man's matter-of-fact acceptance. "Just Hank, madam. We don't stand on ceremony much out here." He turned to Riley. "Cattle arrived 2 days ago, 30 head, all healthy. Got them settled in the north pasture with the rest of the herd." "Excellent," Riley said. "Any other news?" "Nothing that won't keep until you've had a chance to rest from your journey." Hank moved to take the reins of their horses. "I'll see to the animals. You two go on inside. There's hot food waiting." The interior of the cabin was even more impressive than its exterior suggested. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and comfortable-looking furniture arranged for conversation. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that made Madeline's eyes widen in appreciation. A dining table that could seat 8 stood near a doorway that presumably led to a kitchen. "You live here alone?" Madeline asked, taking in the size of the place. "With Hank," Riley clarified. "Though he has his own cabin nearby, he just keeps an eye on things when I'm away." He gestured toward a hallway. "There are 3 bedrooms. I've had the guest room prepared for you." Madeline appreciated his tacit acknowledgement of propriety, despite the isolation of the ranch and the evolution of their relationship. After a hearty meal of venison stew that Hank had prepared before their arrival, Riley showed Madeline around the property. The ranch was larger than she'd expected, with extensive pasture land for cattle and several natural springs that ensured water even in dry seasons. "My father always said water is more valuable than gold in cattle country," Riley explained as they walked along the creek that bisected the property. "When I was looking for land, this water source was what convinced me. The soil is good too. We grow enough hay to see the herd through winter without buying feed." "It's impressive," Madeline said sincerely. "You've built something substantial here." "It's taken 5 years of hard work," Riley acknowledged, "but it's been worth it. Though I've realized lately there's more to life than cattle and good water." His gaze met hers, and Madeline felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Such as companionship, sharing beauty with someone who appreciates it, having someone to read Whitman with beside the fire." His smile was gentle. "You'll discover the winters are long up here. Good books and good company make all the difference." That evening, after Hank had retired to his own cabin, Madeline and Riley sat before the fireplace, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall, pattering against the roof in a soothing rhythm. "Are you comfortable?" Riley asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. "The guest room has extra blankets if you need them. Nights can be cool at this elevation, even in September." "I'm perfectly comfortable," Madeline assured him. "Everything is lovely, Riley. Thank you for bringing me here." He settled beside her, close but not crowding. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would, especially after the scare with the marshal." Madeline studied the dancing flames, gathering her thoughts. "That incident made me realize something important. I've spent years looking over my shoulder, expecting the past to catch up with me. But in doing so, I've been blind to the present and to possibilities for the future." Riley's expression was attentive, encouraging her to continue. "When I thought I might have to run again," Madeline went on, "my first thought wasn't about where I would go or how I would survive. It was about who I would be leaving behind." She met his gaze directly. "That surprised me." Riley reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm glad you didn't have to run, but if you had, I want you to know I would have gone with you." The simple declaration took her breath away. "You would have left your ranch, everything you've built here." "In a heartbeat," he confirmed without hesitation. "Ranches can be rebuilt. Land can be bought and sold. But finding someone who makes you feel truly alive, that's rare beyond measure." Madeline felt tears prick behind her eyes, unfamiliar emotion tightening her throat. "I don't know what to say to that." "You don't need to say anything," Riley assured her, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Just know that it's true." Later, as Madeline settled into the comfortable guest room bed, she found herself contemplating the strange path that had led her here from the tragedy of her father's death, through years of vengeance and running, to finding unexpected connection with a man who saw her clearly and valued what he saw. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, Riley was right about the difference between merely surviving and truly living. Perhaps it was time to embrace the latter. The days that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Riley showed her every aspect of the ranch operation, from the careful breeding program he'd established for his cattle to the vegetable garden behind the main house that supplied much of their produce. Madeline found herself increasingly fascinated by the self-sufficient world he had created. She also discovered that Riley had been modest about his success. The herd numbered nearly 300 head, with plans for expansion. The small spread he described was actually substantial by territorial standards. "Why did you downplay all this?" she asked one afternoon as they rode the perimeter of his property, checking fence lines. Riley looked somewhat embarrassed. I didn't want you to think I was trying to impress you with material success. Or worse, that I might be looking for someone to help manage what I've built rather than a true partner. The word partner hung in the air between them, laden with implication. Is that what you're looking for? Madeline asked carefully. A partner. Riley reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her directly. I wasn't looking for anything when I came to Camp Verde, Madeline. I genuinely did need cattle, and I genuinely was curious about the woman who could outshoot every man in town. But, she prompted, sensing more to his explanation. But sometimes life surprises you, he continued. Sometimes you find exactly what you need when you're not looking for it at all. And what is it you need, Riley Ryder? Madeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze was steady, unwavering. Someone who sees the world clearly, who understands that strength comes in many forms, someone who appreciates Whitman under the stars and isn't afraid to live life on her own terms. A small smile tugged at his lips. Someone who can teach me to shoot straight and true. The simplicity and honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. Without conscious thought, Madeline guided her horse closer to his until they were knee to knee. I've never been good with words, she admitted. Not like you with your poetry and philosophy. But I know what I feel when I'm with you, and it's like coming home, which is strange because I haven't had a real home since I was 19. Riley reached across the space between them, his hand warm against her cheek. Maybe home isn't a place, Madeline. Maybe it's a feeling. A person. Maybe, she agreed, leaning into his touch. If that's true, then I think I've found mine. The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Riley's smile was radiant. Does this mean you'll consider staying? Not just visiting, but staying? Madeline thought about Camp Verde, about the small ranch she'd left behind. It had served its purpose, providing security when she needed it most. But Riley's ranch with its sweeping vistas, its peaceful routines, and most importantly, the man beside her offered something more precious, a future. Yes, she said simply, I'll stay. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments and discoveries, as Madeline found her place within the rhythm of ranch life. She wrote to her neighbor in Camp Verde, arranging for her property there to be sold, keeping only her personal belongings and her father's guns. Hank, initially cautious around the newcomer, quickly came to appreciate Madeline's practical nature and willingness to work. When he discovered her shooting prowess, his respect elevated to something approaching awe. Never seen anything like it, he told Riley one evening after Madeline had dispatched a rattlesnake threatening the chicken coop with a single, precise shot from 30 paces. Where'd you find her again? Camp Verde, Riley replied with a smile. But I'm increasingly convinced she found me. As autumn deepened toward winter, the landscape around the ranch transformed. The ponderosa pines stood stark against skies that grew increasingly heavy with the promise of snow. Madeline found herself anticipating the winter Riley had described, curious about the transformation he promised. One evening in early November, as they sat reading together before the fire, Riley closed his book with deliberate care. Madeline, there's something I'd like to ask you. She looked up from her own volume, a collection of Emerson essays from Riley's extensive library. Yes. Riley set aside his book and moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hand in his. These past months have been the happiest of my life. Having you here, building this life together, it's more than I ever imagined possible. Madeline's heart began to race as she recognized the seriousness in his expression. I know we've done things in an unusual order, Riley continued, living together before any formal commitment, but I find I want that commitment very much. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small ring with a modest diamond set in silver. "Madeline Nash, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it, the earnestness in Riley's eyes, the simple beauty of the ring he offered overwhelmed her. For a moment, she couldn't speak, emotion closing her throat. "You don't have to answer immediately," Riley said gently, misinterpreting her silence. "I understand if you need time to—" "Yes," Madeline interrupted, finding her voice. "Yes, Riley, I will marry you." Relief and joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it since the day we left Camp Verde, waiting for the right moment." "It's beautiful," Madeline said, admiring how the diamond caught the firelight, "and all the more precious for having belonged to her." Riley rose from his knees to sit beside her on the chair, gathering her into his arms. "She would have loved you," he murmured against her hair. "Strong, independent, clear-eyed about the world. You remind me of her in many ways." Madeline leaned into his embrace, savoring the security and warmth she found there. "When shall we marry?" she asked practically. "As soon as possible," Riley replied without hesitation, "though we'll need to go to Flagstaff for the ceremony. The circuit preacher won't be through again until spring." "Flagstaff is fine," Madeline agreed. "I have little use for elaborate ceremonies." Riley laughed softly. "Nor I, though I insist on one thing: a proper celebration afterward. The neighbors should meet my bride, and Hank deserves a party after putting up with my bachelor ways for so long." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Flagstaff's small church, with Hank serving as witness and a handful of Riley's neighboring ranchers and business associates in attendance. Madeline wore a simple blue dress she'd purchased in town, with her mother's locket as her only adornment. As they exchanged vows, Madeline found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had led her to this moment, from the tragedy of her father's death to the vengeance that had sent her running, to the sanctuary of Camp Verde, and finally, to this man who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, and Riley's kiss sealed their commitment with a promise Madeline knew in her heart he would keep. The celebration at the ranch afterward was more festive than Madeline had anticipated. Neighbors from miles around came to congratulate the couple, bringing food, drink, and gifts for the new bride. Madeline, who had grown accustomed to solitude, found herself surprisingly comfortable among these straightforward, practical people. "They like you," Riley observed as they shared a quiet moment on the porch, watching their guests mingle in the yard where tables had been set up. "Especially old Jenkins. I think he's planning to challenge you to a shooting match once he works up the courage." Madeline laughed, a free, easy sound that came more naturally to her these days. "He's welcome to try, though perhaps I should let you win occasionally to maintain marital harmony." Riley's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Don't you dare. I want a wife who shoots straight in all things." As evening fell and the guests began to depart, the first snowflakes of the season drifted down from a pewter sky. Madeline stood at the edge of the porch, her hand outstretched to catch the delicate crystalline structures. "You promised me snow," she said as Riley joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "It seems the weather cooperated with our wedding day." "The first of many winters together," Riley replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Each one better than the last." That night, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, Madeline marveled at the turn her life had taken. From a woman who trusted no one, always looking over her shoulder, to a wife with a home and a future stretching before her. "What are you thinking?" Riley asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder as they watched the snow continue to fall outside their window. "That I never expected to be here," she admitted. "That day in Camp Verde when you asked me to teach you to shoot, I nearly refused." "I'm glad you didn't," Riley said, drawing her closer. "So am I." Madeline turned to face him, her expression serious. "You know, you never really needed those lessons. You were already a fine shot." Riley's smile was sheepish. "Perhaps. But I needed a reason to spend time with the fascinating woman who could outshoot every man in town. And I did learn a great deal about shooting and about the shooter." "You're incorrigible," Madeline said fondly. "Yet you married me anyway," he pointed out, kissing her softly. "I consider that my greatest achievement." Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the landscape into the winter wonderland Riley had promised. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Madeline Nash Ryder discovered the final piece of what had been missing in her life: not just security or independence, but the profound connection of being truly known and loved. 5 years later, Madeline sat on the front porch of the ranch house, watching as Riley taught their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his pony in the fenced paddock nearby. The boy's delighted laughter carried on the summer breeze, mingling with the sounds of cattle in the distance and the steady rhythm of Hank chopping wood behind the house. At her feet, 2-year-old Elizabeth played with wooden blocks, constructing and demolishing towers with equal enthusiasm. The little girl was the image of her mother, with the same honey-brown hair and determined set to her jaw. Life at Ryder Ranch had flourished in the years since their marriage. The cattle operation had expanded, requiring additional hands during busy seasons. The main house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a second story added the previous year. Madeline's skill with a gun remained legendary in the region, though these days she used it primarily for hunting and the occasional friendly competition at local gatherings. The woman who had once been perpetually vigilant, expecting danger around every corner, had gradually relaxed into the security of her new life. Not that she had grown complacent. The Derringer still resided in a pocket of her apron, and she practiced regularly to keep her edge. Some habits, formed in harder times, were too ingrained to abandon completely. Riley completed the riding lesson and lifted Thomas from the pony's back, setting him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. The boy waved excitedly to his mother, his face flushed with pride at his accomplishment. "Did you see, Mama? I rode all by myself," he called as they approached. "I saw, sweetheart," Madeline confirmed. "You're becoming quite the horseman." Riley deposited their son on the porch steps, ruffling his dark hair affectionately. "Takes after his mother, fearless and determined. And his father's charm," Madeline added with a smile. "A dangerous combination." As Thomas ran off to find Hank, his favorite storyteller besides his father, Riley settled beside Madeline on the porch swing, automatically reaching down to catch Elizabeth's blocks when they rolled too close to the edge. "Letter came while you were out with Thomas," Madeline said, handing him an envelope. "From the Cattlemen's Association in Denver." Riley opened it, scanning the contents with interest. "They're inviting me to speak at their annual gathering next month. About our breeding program and grazing rotation system." "That's quite an honor," Madeline observed. "Will you accept?" "Only if you'll come with me," Riley replied. "Denver in September should be pleasant, and I seem to recall you mentioned once that you'd never seen a real theater performance." Denver has an excellent opera house. The thought of traveling to Colorado stirred mixed emotions in Madeline. She hadn't returned since fleeing after her father's death nearly 12 years ago. Yet the prospect of seeing Denver, of experiencing the cultural offerings Riley described, held definite appeal. "What about the children?" she asked practically. "Hank and Mrs. Lawson would be delighted to look after them for a week," Riley said, referring to their housekeeper who came in 3 days a week from a neighboring farm. "It would be good for us to have some time alone, and I think—" He hesitated, studying her face. "I think perhaps it's time you made peace with Colorado." Madeline considered his words, recognizing the wisdom in them. The past that had once driven her actions now seemed distant, almost belonging to another person. "Perhaps you're right," she acknowledged. "Though I have no desire to revisit my father's ranch." "We don't need to go anywhere near there," Riley assured her. "Just Denver for the conference and perhaps a few days of sightseeing." "Then yes," she decided. "I'd like to accompany you." Riley smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Good. And while we're there, we might look into this new photography process everyone's talking about. I'd like to have a family portrait made before Elizabeth grows any more. She's changing every day." Madeline watched as their daughter, apparently bored with blocks, toddled over to examine a grasshopper on the porch rail. "They both are. Sometimes I can hardly believe how quickly time passes." "Regrets?" Riley asked softly. She turned to look at him, taking in the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, the laugh lines around his eyes deeper now, a touch of silver at his temples, but still the same clear gaze that had seen through her defenses that day in Camp Verde. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "Every step, every choice, even the difficult ones, led me here. How could I regret that?" Riley leaned in to kiss her, a gesture that still sent warmth through her even after 5 years of marriage. "I love you, Madeline Ryder." "And I love you," she replied, the words coming easily now where once they had been so difficult to say. "Though I still think you orchestrated those shooting lessons just to spend time with me." His laugh confirmed her suspicion. "Guilty as charged, though in my defense, I did learn a great deal. Your father's wisdom lives on in your teaching." The mention of her father brought not pain but a gentle nostalgia. "He would have liked you," Madeline said thoughtfully. "He always said I needed someone who wouldn't be intimidated by a woman who knew her own mind." "And who could shoot straight," Riley added with a smile. "That too." As the afternoon faded toward evening, with Thomas returning to regale them with stories Hank had told him about his younger days as a Texas Ranger, and Elizabeth falling asleep in her father's lap, Madeline reflected on the strange, wonderful journey life had taken her on. From the girl who had learned to shoot to protect herself in a dangerous world, to the woman who had sought vengeance for her father's death, to the fugitive looking over her shoulder, and finally to this wife, mother, rancher, still the best shot in the county but now known for so much more. "Penny for your thoughts," Riley said softly as Thomas ran inside to wash up for dinner. Madeline smiled, the expression now natural where once it had been rare. "I was just thinking about lessons," she said. "How sometimes the teacher learns as much as the student." Riley nodded, understanding her meaning without needing elaboration. "The best kind of education," he agreed, "mutual and ongoing." Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet save for the ticking of the grandfather clock Riley had brought back from a trip to San Francisco the previous year, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. "You ever miss Camp Verde?" Riley asked, his fingers entwined with hers. Madeline considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the warmth in winter," she admitted with a smile. "But no, not really. It served its purpose in my life, but it was never truly home." "And this is?" Riley asked, though he knew the answer. Madeline looked at the man beside her, thinking of their children sleeping peacefully inside, of the life they'd built together, of the love that had transformed her from a woman alone to part of something larger and infinitely more precious. "This is," she confirmed, squeezing his hand. "You are." The shooting instructor, and her once pupil sat together under the vast Arizona sky, their story still unfolding, still teaching them both lessons neither could have anticipated that day, when a skilled marksman had asked a remarkable woman to share her secrets. Some secrets, Madeline reflected, were worth sharing, and some, like the perfect, unexpected joy of finding love when least expected, were worth discovering together, one day at a time, for all the years to come.